Hello, and welcome to the Unseen Question. The word rapture never appears in the Bible, not once, and yet, for millions of believers, it's one of the most central and emotionally charged ideas in modern Christianity. The sudden disappearance of the faithful, the chaos left behind, and the end of the world that follows. It's a dramatic image: cars crashing, clothes left in piles, planes falling from the sky, and it's been repeated in books, sermons and movies so many times that it feels biblical, but it isn't. The idea of the rapture, as people understand it today, doesn't come from the Bible itself. It comes from a series of 19th century interpretations, later reinforced by pop culture and fear-driven theology. If you asked an early Christian, even one from the first few centuries after Jesus, what the rapture was, they'd have no idea what you were talking about. The term comes from a single verse, 1 Thessalonians 4:17, where Paul says believers will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. The Latin translation used the word rapiamur, meaning to be caught up or snatched away, and from that one translation, centuries later came the modern English term rapture. But language isn't the same thing as doctrine. One phrase about being caught up doesn't describe a global vanishing act. Paul's letter was about comforting a grieving community who thought their dead loved ones had missed Jesus' return. He wasn't predicting planes falling from the sky. He was writing pastorally, not prophetically. The modern version of the rapture, where the faithful are taken up before a 7-year apocalypse, came from a Scottish teenager named Margaret MacDonald in the 1830s. She had a vision, and a British preacher named John Nelson Darby took it seriously. He combined it with his own new theological system called dispensationalism, a complex timeline dividing history into ages of God's dealings with humanity. Darby's ideas spread to America through revival meetings and prophetic conferences. They fit neatly into a culture already obsessed with the end times. Soon, preachers across the United States were warning people to get ready for the rapture, but this was never mainstream Christianity before that moment. For almost 1800 years, Christians didn't teach that believers would vanish before a tribulation. They believed that all of humanity, living and dead, would face judgment together. The rapture only became popular because it was marketed. In the 1900s, the Schofield Reference Bible added notes interpreting Paul's letters through Darby's lens. Millions of people began reading those notes as if they were part of Scripture. The interpretation became inseparable from the text, and in American churches, the rapture turned from a fringe belief into a cultural certainty. By the late 20th century, it wasn't just theology, it all was entertainment. Books like The Late Great Planet Earth and Left Behind turned the rapture into a blockbuster concept. It sold fear as faith, salvation as suspense, and the Bible as prophecy for modern headlines. But here's the problem: none of it holds up under serious examination. The passages often cited, like Matthew 24 or Revelation 4, don't describe the faithful disappearing. They describe symbolic visions, political turmoil, persecution, and hope for renewal. The 2 men in the field, one taken and one left, doesn't mean one was saved and one damned. In context, the taken ones were compared to those swept away by the flood in Noah's day. The ones destroyed, the ones left behind, were actually the survivors. In other words, the popular interpretation reverses the original meaning. The rapture isn't just a misunderstanding, it's an inversion of the text itself. And that misunderstanding has shaped modern Christian culture in ways most people don't realize. It fuels a worldview of escape instead of engagement. Believers are told not to worry about global warming, inequality, or injustice, because the world's going to end soon anyway. Why polish brass on a sinking ship, they say. That phrase itself comes from rapture-focused preaching. This theology trains people to watch the sky instead of fixing the ground beneath them, to anticipate the end instead of improving the present. It's an apocalyptic coping mechanism, not a moral framework. And when a belief convinces millions that suffering and destruction are signs of hope, that wars and disasters are necessary steps toward salvation, it becomes dangerous. Throughout the Cold War, rapture preaching shaped American politics. Politicians used it to justify aggressive foreign policy in the Middle East, believing conflict there fulfilled prophecy. Churches used it to rally fear and loyalty. TV preachers built empires on the idea that the end was near, and only their ministry could prepare you. And every few decades, someone recalculates the dates: 1988, 2000, 2012, always another countdown, always another disappointment. Each time, people sell their homes, quit their jobs, and abandon their lives. And when nothing happens, the leaders say, "We misread the signs," and the cycle begins again. It's a powerful lesson in how religious ideas can self-perpetuate. Every failure becomes proof of the next prediction. Every missed date is a test of faith rather than a falsification. That's how belief systems protect themselves from reality. But step back and ask, what kind of worldview depends on the world ending? Why would a moral or spiritual truth require everything to collapse first? If the rapture were real, it would mean that morality only matters for those chosen to escape, and the rest of humanity, billions of people, were created just to be left behind. That's not hope, that's cosmic elitism. And yet, this idea persists, not because the Bible supports it, but because it gives people a sense of control in a chaotic world. The rapture offers an emotional shortcut, a way to feel chosen, protected, and certain. When life feels uncertain and random, being told that you'll be whisked away before things get bad is deeply comforting. It's a psychological survival story, not a scriptural one. Fear is persuasive. It bypasses logic. And when fear is packaged as divine truth, it becomes almost untouchable. People cling to it because it feels safer than doubt. But if you actually care about truth, you can't afford to protect comforting stories from scrutiny. And the rapture crumbles under even light examination. The Greek word Paul used, harpazo, simply means to seize or to snatch away. It's used elsewhere in the Bible to describe taking something suddenly, like a wolf snatching a sheep. It doesn't mean levitation into heaven, and Paul's letter makes it clear he expected this event to happen soon, in his own lifetime. When that didn't happen, later generations of Christians had to reinterpret his words to keep the system intact. This is one of the defining patterns of religious belief, reinterpretation to survive disconfirmation. And yet the idea of being caught up remains compelling because it taps into something deeply human, the longing to escape suffering, to be lifted out of danger, to know we're special enough to be saved when everything falls apart. It's the same reason superhero movies, chosen one stories, and even alien abduction myths resonate. They all promise that we won't be ordinary victims of the world, that someone or something will pull us out of it just in time. But reality doesn't work that way. No one is coming to pull us out. We either face the world we've made, or we're buried under it. The rapture myth lets people shift responsibility away from themselves. If the world's ending anyway, why fix it? If suffering is prophecy, why stop it? If injustice is a sign of the times, why resist it? That's how an idea with no scriptural foundation ends up shaping real-world behavior, from environmental neglect to political extremism. Some preachers even celebrate global crises as birth pains of the end. They look at wildfires, pandemics, or wars and say, this means Jesus is coming soon. When you believe destruction is divine, you stop trying to prevent it. It's a paradox of faith, believing the world is sacred, but acting as though it's disposable. And that's the tragic irony. The rapture, a belief meant to bring comfort, ends up fueling apathy and fear and division. There's another side to this too. If you tell people that only a select group will be taken, while everyone else is doomed, you're reinforcing the same us versus them mentality that drives so much conflict. Every cult, every extremist group, every ideology that believes we'll be saved, they'll be destroyed, follows the same psychological pattern. The rapture narrative is just a mainstream version of that same binary thinking. It's worth asking why such an idea thrives in modern Christianity when it didn't exist in early Christianity. The answer might lie in how the world changed. The Industrial Revolution, global wars, nuclear fear, climate anxiety. These all created fertile ground for apocalyptic thinking. The rapture offered an easy answer to deep uncertainty. In a sense, the rapture is less about religion than about the human desire to escape accountability. It's the promise that someone else, a savior, a divine plan, will fix what we broke. But that's not a moral system. That's wishful thinking. When belief becomes a substitute for responsibility, the result isn't faith, it's surrender. The Bible never promised a secret escape from the world. That idea was added later by people who couldn't face it. Maybe that's the real lesson here, that comfort isn't truth, that an idea can feel right, even holy, and still be completely made up. The rapture is a story built from fear, shaped by culture, and protected by emotion. But it's not in the Bible, and it never was. The rapture isn't just a misinterpretation of a few verses. It's a reflection of how religion evolves to meet emotional needs, rather than factual ones. When people feel powerless, they gravitate toward ideas that restore a sense of control, even if those ideas defy logic. That's the hidden appeal of apocalyptic belief. It gives chaos a script. If the world feels unstable, it's comforting to think that instability is part of a plan, that there's meaning behind every war, every disaster, every political upheaval. Even the worst events become signs instead of tragedies. And if you happen to believe you'll escape before it all collapses, that's even better. It transforms fear into privilege, anxiety into anticipation. It turns a world that seems hostile into one that's secretly working in your favor. But what happens when that story seeps into every part of society? You start to see it in politics, environmental policy, education, in how people view progress and science. If you believe history is a countdown to destruction, then investing in the future becomes meaningless. This is why, in parts of the world where rapture theology dominates, long-term planning often takes a back seat to short-term emotional reassurance. After all, if you're convinced the world will end any day now, why care about 50 years from now? Why worry about sustainability, reform, or prevention? In a strange way, the rapture functions like a moral loophole. It allows people to feel righteous while ignoring responsibility. They can claim to love humanity, yet quietly accept, even look forward to, its annihilation. And that might be the most unsettling part of all. The rapture turns empathy into a liability. Caring about the world too much means you're too attached to it. Questioning prophecy means you lack faith. So the belief system closes in on itself. It rewards certainty and punishes curiosity. It teaches people to read fear as faith and compassion as compromise. In psychological terms, this is what's called cognitive closure, the craving for definite answers in an uncertain world. People who feel threatened by ambiguity often cling to absolute beliefs, even when those beliefs are inconsistent or irrational. Apocalyptic theology feeds that craving perfectly. It offers a full, sealed narrative of existence. The beginning, the middle, and the end, all mapped out in advance. Nothing unpredictable, nothing random, everything fits neatly into prophecy. But reality isn't neat. And when belief systems built on certainty collide with an uncertain world, something has to give. Usually it's reason. When you step back and look at the history of failed end-time predictions, it's astonishing how similar they all are. From the Millerites in 1844 to the televangelists of the 1980s to modern YouTube prophets, each time they interpret current events through prophecy. Each time they're wrong, and each time they reinterpret the failure as part of the prophecy itself. That's not prophecy. That's confirmation bias dressed as revelation. The irony is, the early Christian texts that talk about the end weren't even describing the end of the world. They were describing the end of a corrupt age, a hope for justice, not destruction. Apocalyptic writing in ancient times was political commentary disguised as vision, a way for oppressed people to express resistance without directly naming their oppressors. The book of Revelation, for example, is filled with coded references to Rome, the beast, the harlot, the 7 hills. It's not a roadmap for future events. It's a poetic protest against empire. But once those texts were pulled out of their historical context, centuries later they became blank screens onto which people could project their fears. Every generation reinterprets them for its own anxieties. Plague, war, nuclear bombs, pandemics, artificial intelligence. The rapture simply became the modern form of that projection, an industrial age update of an ancient fear. And once money got involved, it exploded. The rapture industry is worth millions. Books, movies, conferences, TV specials, even survival kits marketed to those who think they'll be left behind. Religion became a subscription model for fear. Every sermon that promises to decode prophecy reinforces the illusion that you're in on a secret others don't see. It creates an in-group of the enlightened and an out-group of the deceived. That dynamic, the feeling of being special because you see the truth others can't, is psychologically addictive. It activates the same reward circuits in the brain as gambling or conspiracy thinking. Every new sign of the end provides a dopamine hit of confirmation. That's why so many believers can't let it go. It's not just a belief, it's an identity. And to question it feels like betrayal, not curiosity, even when evidence piles up against it. When the signs fail, when the dates pass, the belief persists because it's no longer about facts. It's about belonging. There's a reason that after every failed prophecy, followers double down instead of walking away. Leaving the belief would mean admitting that years of devotion, sacrifice, and fear were for nothing. And the human mind resists that conclusion with everything it has. It's the same mechanism that keeps people in cults long after their predictions collapse. Belief becomes more than a claim about reality. It becomes reality itself. And when that happens, no amount of evidence can shake it, because it's not about truth anymore. It's about meaning. That's what the rapture provides. Instant meaning in an indifferent universe, an answer to chaos, a cosmic purpose where none exists. But here's the thing, meaning doesn't have to come from illusion. It can come from reality, from understanding, from compassion, from creating a future worth having instead of waiting for it to end. When you replace prophecy with responsibility, fear loses its power. What's remarkable is that even many theologians within Christianity now admit the rapture isn't biblical. Scholars across denominations, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, agree that it's a modern invention, yet the belief continues to thrive among lay people and popular pastors. Because it was never about scholarship, it was about storytelling. And stories are powerful. When told often enough, they override facts. For many believers, the rapture is part of their emotional DNA. It's what gives their faith urgency. Without it, the system loses some of its leverage. A faith built on love and ethics doesn't need the world to end to prove it's right, but a faith built on fear does. That's why preachers keep bringing it up, because it keeps people anxious, alert, and loyal. Fear keeps the donations flowing and the pews filled, and yet that same fear robs people of the very peace they think they're pursuing. Living every day expecting global annihilation is not hope. It's chronic anxiety disguised as faith. It makes life feel temporary, fragile, and meaningless. Because if you're always waiting to be taken away, you never fully arrive. There's a deeper truth hidden beneath all of this. The rapture endures not because it's true, but because it reflects the human condition, our struggle to make peace with mortality, our desire to believe we'll somehow outlive death, not as memory, but as escape. It's the same impulse behind heaven, resurrection, reincarnation, anything that says, this isn't the end, but maybe real courage is in accepting that it is, and choosing to live fully anyway. If there's no rapture, no second chance, no divine reset button, then this world, this life, suddenly matters infinitely more. Your choices matter, your compassion matters, what you build, how you treat people, what kind of world you leave behind. It all matters because there's no cosmic do-over coming. That idea isn't bleak, it's liberating, because it means meaning isn't waiting for us in the sky. It's something we create here, together. The myth of the rapture says salvation comes from being taken away. Reality suggests salvation, if it exists at all, comes from staying, from facing what's real and trying to make it better. That's the quiet, unspoken truth beneath all the noise, that there's more humanity in the people left behind, trying to rebuild, care, and create, than in those who spend their lives hoping to escape. The Bible never promised an evacuation, but life still offers an invitation to grow, to care, to think, to act, and maybe that's the only kind of redemption that's ever been real. The longer you study the rapture, the more it starts to look like a mirror, not of divine prophecy, but of human psychology. It reveals what people fear, what they hope for, and what they can't accept about the world around them. It's not a window into the future. It's a portrait of the present. When people feel powerless, they create narratives that make them powerful again. The rapture gives ordinary people a starring role in a cosmic story. They aren't just spectators of history, they're chosen participants in the finale. That's intoxicating. It's the same psychological mechanism that drives conspiracy theories. The belief that I know what others don't, I see the pattern behind the chaos, I'm special because I understand the plan, and that's why it spreads so easily. Once you feel that emotional high, you start to see signs everywhere. Earthquakes, wars, political shifts. Everything becomes confirmation. Every random event becomes evidence. You no longer look at the world as it is, but as a coded message waiting to be decoded. The random becomes purposeful, the meaningless becomes meaningful, and you, by believing, become part of something grand. That's why no amount of debunking ever really kills the rapture. Because the logic that sustains it isn't external, it's emotional. When people say, the Bible says we'll be raptured, what they usually mean is, I need this story to be true. It's less about scripture and more about security. But that emotional security comes at a cost. It teaches people to hope for an ending instead of a beginning, to cheer for collapse instead of progress. Every time someone says, these are the last days, it quietly drains meaning from the days we actually have. If you've ever talked to someone deeply invested in rapture theology, you'll notice how their entire worldview revolves around waiting for the trumpet, the signs, the skies to open. Everything becomes about preparation, not participation. And in that waiting, life slips by. That's one of the quiet tragedies of belief systems like this. They replace curiosity with certainty and presence with anticipation. They promise life after death, but steal life before it. But if you strip away the layers of doctrine, what's left isn't evil or foolishness. It's fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being alone, fear that the world might not care about you. The rapture, in a strange way, answers all those fears at once. It says you are seen, you are chosen, and everything will be okay. But only if you believe. That's a deeply powerful message, and it's why so many cling to it, even when evidence, history, and reason point in the opposite direction. Because to lose that belief feels like falling, like free falling, into uncertainty. And yet the paradox is that once you do let go, once you stop needing the story to be true, you start to find something far more grounded and fulfilling. You realize that meaning doesn't need to be handed down, it can be built up. That compassion doesn't need divine reward. It's valuable on its own. That morality doesn't need cosmic punishment to matter. It matters because of how it affects real lives. That shift, from hoping to be rescued to choosing to take responsibility, is what makes humanity mature. It's what turns superstition into self-awareness. Maybe that's what evolution looks like, not in biology, but in thought. When early humans looked at thunder, they saw gods. When they looked at sickness, they saw demons. When they looked at death, they saw eternity. We've always filled the unknown with stories. The rapture is just one of the newer ones. But the world doesn't end because we stop believing it will. It just keeps going. And maybe that's harder to accept. The idea that there's no grand finale, no dramatic exit, no chosen few lifted out of the chaos, just us, the species that must learn to survive or not by its own hands. It's not as glamorous as being caught up in the clouds, but it's real. And reality, in the long run, is where our only hope actually lives. The fascinating thing is how this myth shaped global attitudes toward the future. Throughout the 20th century, rapture preaching coincided with a decline in collective optimism. It normalized fatalism. It taught generations that trying to improve the world was almost arrogant, as if human progress could interfere with God's plan. And you can still hear echoes of that today, when people dismiss climate science or social reform or human rights movements saying it's all part of prophecy. That's rapture thinking. It's passivity disguised as faith. It's the same thinking that allows injustice to persist. If every tragedy is meant to happen, then no one is responsible. That's why belief systems like this are more than theological curiosities. They shape behavior, policy, and the course of civilization itself. And yet there's something hopeful about knowing the truth. Because once you realize that the rapture isn't real, the future suddenly opens up. If no one's coming to save us, then saving each other becomes our job. If the world isn't ending, then we have time to rebuild, to rethink, to repair. And maybe that's a far better story, not one of divine rescue, but of human resilience. Think about it. The idea that we could face disaster, not as a sign of prophecy, but as a test of compassion. That's far more meaningful than vanishing into the sky. Maybe the real rapture isn't an event that takes us away, but an awakening that brings us back to the reality we've ignored, the problems we've deferred, the humanity we've neglected. That kind of awakening doesn't need angels or trumpets. It just needs awareness. The ancient writers who composed the Bible weren't predicting our future. They were expressing theirs. They wrote in the language of symbol, not science, of poetry, not prediction. To read their words as blueprints is to miss their meaning entirely. It's like mistaking a dream for a map. But once you see that, once you stop reading ancient fear as modern fact, the whole structure of prophecy starts to crumble, and beneath it you find something simple, the truth that we are the ones responsible for what happens next. That's the one message hidden under all the noise of apocalyptic belief, that no one's coming to fix what we refuse to face. And if you take that seriously, if you really accept that this is the only world we get, it doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it urgent. Because when there's no next world, this one becomes sacred by default, not in a religious sense, but in a human one. That's what the myth of the rapture accidentally reveals. Not a divine plan, but a human need. The need for hope, control, and meaning. But those needs don't require fantasy to be met. They just require honesty. We don't need to be taken up to find purpose. We need to wake up. The rapture was never in the Bible. It was always in us, in our fear, our longing, our need for order. And once we understand that, we can finally stop waiting for the end and start beginning again. Epilogue. Maybe the real story humanity's been trying to tell, through myths, scriptures, and prophecies, isn't about the world ending at all. Maybe it's about the struggle to grow up as a species, to move from dependence to responsibility, from waiting for salvation to realizing we are capable of saving ourselves. The rapture, in that light, becomes a symbol of immaturity, of a civilization still afraid to face its own reflection, afraid to admit that if there's no divine plan, then everything that happens, the wars, the famines, the progress, the healing, is up to us. But that realization doesn't need to be frightening. It can be empowering, because once you stop waiting for a supernatural rescue, you start seeing how much power you already have. Every act of kindness, every pursuit of truth, every refusal to look away from injustice, those are the things that actually pull us upward. Not out of the world, but beyond the limits of ignorance and fear. That's a kind of ascension no scripture could ever describe, and maybe that's what all those ancient symbols of rising and awakening we're always trying to point to, not a physical event in the sky, but a moral one in the mind. The rapture doesn't need to happen because it already can, here, every day, in small moments of awareness, compassion, and courage. When you stop searching for the end, you start finding meaning in the middle, in the messy, imperfect reality we all share. And that's where the real redemption has always been hiding, not in being chosen or taken or saved, but in choosing to see the world clearly, to face it honestly, and to make it better while we're still here. Because in the end, the rapture isn't coming. We are the ones rising, not into the clouds, but into consciousness, not into heaven, but into understanding. The real taking up isn't a vanishing act, it's a waking up. It's the moment a person stops outsourcing meaning to mythology and starts creating it from reality. It's a quieter kind of transcendence. No trumpets, no thunder, no divine countdown, just awareness expanding beyond superstition. And that's far more miraculous than anything written in prophecy. Because when people stop waiting for the world to end, they finally start caring about the world itself. They stop treating existence like a test and start treating it like a home. That's the paradox religion never intended but accidentally revealed, that the end-time myth, when stripped of its literalism, becomes an invitation to live more fully, to stop living for later and start living for now. Every time someone says the end is near, the real question should be, the end of what? Maybe what's ending isn't the world, but an illusion that we're powerless, that meaning must come from above, that morality must be dictated rather than discovered. The collapse isn't cosmic, it's cultural. It's the fall of an old way of thinking, and in its place, something clearer begins to rise. That's what the death of the rapture myth represents. Not despair, but evolution. Humanity shedding another layer of magical thinking and stepping closer to maturity. And maybe when we finally stop needing to be taken away, we'll realize that staying fully, consciously, compassionately was always the point. So if you ever hear someone say, the rapture is coming, maybe the best response isn't fear, but calm understanding. Because the truth is, it already came and went. In the moment, humanity began to open its eyes, and from here on out, the only direction left to go is forward. That's the ending the world deserves. Not fire, not flight, not divine rescue, just a species finally awake in its own story, building, learning, and rising. Not to escape the world, but to inhabit it completely. The rapture was never about leaving. It was always about arriving.